Welcome to the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast. I'm your host, Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. In today's podcast episode, I'm being joined by Brent Lucas, CEO of Envoy Medical. Also joining us is my Water Tower Research Equity Research colleague, Robert Sassoon. Envoy Medical is a hearing health company focused on providing innovative technologies across the hearing loss spectrum. The company is listed on NASDAQ under ticker symbol COCH. Also joining me is my Water Tower Research Equity Research colleague, Robert Sassoon. So without further ado, let me welcome Brent and Robert to today's podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thanks, Tim. Looking forward to it.
Brent, it's always nice reconnecting with you. And before I turn things over to Robert for several questions, let me kick off the podcast by asking you to tell our listeners about your professional background, which going from memory includes being around the company, frankly, since your teenage years. And also, please provide our audience with a high-level introduction to Envoy Medical's business model.
Absolutely. Brent Lucas, CEO of Envoy Medical. I've been with the company in one form or another, as you alluded to, since my father first invested in the company in 1995. He was actually one of the first outside investors to invest in the company when it was just getting started. So I've been around the company since I was actually in middle school. Started working at the company in 2007 while I was in law school. I was working as an intern for the company, passed the bar, then became a lawyer, started working for the company as general counsel, in-house counsel, and progressed from there. In about 2015, or actually I'll go back a little further, in about 2012, sort of tired out of the legal side of things. I don't really enjoy being a lawyer very much, to be honest with you. So I wanted to go into the field and really understand the product, the patients, why our first product, the Esteem, was having a difficult time getting going, and how it could better serve the company, and frankly, how it could better serve my family's investment by understanding the business. So I got in the field, did business development, which is really pretty much like a sales rep for the company. And then we pivoted, and in 2015, I became the CEO, and we pivoted from our first product to our second product, the Acclaim, which is a cochlear implant, and I know we're going to get there, so I won't steal the thunder there. Overall, I would say, to kind of go back to Envoy Medical, again, listed COCH, we're a publicly listed company, and we are the only American cochlear implant company right now. We are really bringing hearing technology back to the United States. All of our main competitors are all overseas. And so we feel like this is a market that can be disrupted with our technology. And we make fully implanted devices that use the ear to pick up sound. So we're unlike other things that are on the market currently today. And we feel like we have a really nice head start as this market moves from external devices to fully internal devices.
Great, thanks. That's a great overview. And with that, I'll turn it over to Robert.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, Brent, and appreciate you being on this podcast. So there's a well-worn saying that death and taxes are the only two certainties of life, but it might not be too far from the truth to say that once you get to a certain age, like mine, maybe in the 60s, maybe even earlier, hearing loss falls into that category of life certainties. And it can actually be a serious impediment to daily functioning and social interactions. So I know that the degree of hearing loss varies, but perhaps you can give us an idea of the scale of the market and the age demographic when an intervention for hearing loss is typically required, and at the point that the traditional hearing aid may even simply be inadequate.
When you look at the overall hearing loss market, it's enormous. In the United States, for example, I saw a quote the other day that said it's the third most common chronic issue that people deal with in the United States. So hearing loss is a massive problem for all of us. We all know somebody that either has hearing loss or knows somebody with hearing loss. It touches all of us in one form or another. When you look at the numbers, and I'll talk about in the United States, I'm just more familiar with the numbers here in the US. When you look at the numbers in the United States, about 50 million people in the United States have some form of hearing loss. And then when you start to break that down into levels and types, the majority of those folks are well suited for hearing aids, frankly. They're in the what we call mild to moderate category. in traditional sensory neural hearing loss, which is the type of hearing loss most of us have. And most of those people are well treated by by hearing aids. But after a certain point, you progress into the severe and profound category of hearing loss. And hearing aids, frankly, don't do enough for you there. And the reason for that is a hearing aid is really just simply an amplifier, and it's on the outside of your head. So it's just making the sound louder before it gets to your eardrum. So there's only so much your body can do at that point with that additional volume. So there's something called hair cells, which are in the cochlea, and this gets a little bit into the science and into the weeds here. So I'm going to try to stay at a high level. But you have something called hearing hair cells that are in a hearing organ called the cochlea, and those start to die off, and that is what causes hearing loss for most of us. And at a certain point, you have so few of those hair cells that no matter how loud you make the sound on the outside, the information cannot be picked up by those hair cells and brought to your brain. And that is when you need an implant. And we have two versions of implants. We have the Esteem, which is an active middle ear device, and then we have the Acclaim, which is a cochlear implant. And I think we're going to talk about the specifics of both later, so I won't do that now. But I will say we focus on the world of hearing loss and the world of hearing technology that is when hearing aids no longer do it for you. I am not a hearing aid company. I don't want to be a hearing aid CEO. I think the competition within the hearing aid market is going to get extremely intense with over-the-counter and Apple AirPods and everything like that. So we are best situated underneath that, where hearing aids are no longer doing it for you. And frankly, the fact that the hearing aid market is getting so competitive and so many people are coming into that funnel with things like AirPods and over-the-counter hearing aids is ultimately going to benefit implant companies like Envoy. Now, to your point about death and taxes, if as people live longer, so a couple of statistics here. If you're into your 80s, you have about a 90% chance of having significant hearing loss. You're in your 60s, it's probably closer to 60% chance of some significant hearing loss. The folks that we look at, so those people that are not well situated for hearing aids, that in the United States is about 4 million people. So we focus on that category, and in that category, there's very, very little penetration. It's a real unmet need. So we have this sweet spot of people who need something more than a hearing aid, cannot be well treated by a hearing aid. And now we believe we have the best mousetrap in that category, which is a fully implanted cochlear implant.
Great. So you're talking really about 8% of the 50 million population in the United States that would be your addressable market at this particular time. And
yes,
obviously with the aging demographics moving in a right direction for your business, that number will likely increase over time.
Yes, and not only aging population, but also people are exposing themselves to a lot of noise pollution. I do this every night. I wear AirPods when I'm in my bed, and sometimes I fall asleep. That's a horrible thing to do for your hearing. But as we go, more and more people will get hearing aids.
Right. And I mean, also there's another element, maybe it's a much smaller segment of the market, is that there are younger people, unfortunately, that have genetic issues or some serious problems with their ears. Is that something that your products could actually cater for?
So anybody that has, we're currently indicated for adults, so I'll just start there. So 18 years or older for both of our products.
Right.
But there are people that, as long as it's sensory neural hearing loss in origin, we can help those folks.
Right.
So there are some other types of hearing loss, but they're relatively rare, conductive hearing loss and sort of missing nerves and things like that. But if it's sensory neural in origin, and you're over 18 years and you're relatively healthy, there's a good chance that one of our devices would work for you.
Great. So can you actually describe the current landscape for hearing loss solutions?
Absolutely. So their hearing aids are sort of what we're all familiar with. But that, again, is just serving that mild to moderate range. Now, hearing aids have started to stratify significantly in the last couple of years. There was something called the over-the-counter hearing aid legislation that was actually started many, maybe even over a decade ago, but became law relatively recently. And that allows now you to go to Walgreens if you would like, or Best Buy, and buy a hearing aid. So now there's something called over-the-counter hearing aids. There's something called prescription hearing aids. And then you have other things like consumer electronics, like the AirPods, that are now capable of providing some sort of amplification. Those really are all focused in that mild to moderate category. Some people can go into the severe with that, but most of that is really well suited for that that category. Then again, when you get past that sort of severe line, you get into where implants are really needed. And in that category, you have three main players. You have Cochlear in Australia, Medel in Switzerland, which is a privately held company, and Advanced Bionics, which is owned by Sonova. So there's basically three companies. It's definitely an oligopoly controlling the hearing implant marketplace. But they have bone conduction devices and they have cochlear implants. What they do not have, at least that I'm aware of, is fully implanted devices like ours. So we have two fully implanted devices. We have a fully implanted active middle ear implant. It's called the Esteem, FDA approved in 2010. And then we have the Acclaim, which is an investigational device, also fully implanted, and that's a fully implanted cochlear implant. And so not only are the devices fully implanted, but the other differentiator for us is that we use the ear to pick up sound. We do not use a microphone. And we are the only ones currently in the world that I'm familiar with that have that technology. Everybody else uses a microphone on the side of your head or a subdermal microphone. We're the only ones that actually use the ear to pick up sound.
Great. So just moving on to that, are there any technological advances before we get into a little bit more detail about your technology? Are there any other advances that are currently available in the hearing loss market that you would describe as being transformative?
No.
That's an easy question to answer.
Yeah. I mean, that's a reality, and it's something I talk about frequently. This market is ripe for disruption, both on the hearing aid side and the implant side. The companies that are in this space have really not had an incentive to innovate because there's not been somebody coming up behind them. Envoy Medical is actually sort of the first in a long time of a company coming up behind traditional cochlear implant companies. So this market is ripe for disruption. Now, if I get out of the device side, and I will say that I really truly believe the only really innovative, interesting thing in the hearing space right now on the device side is Envoy Medical. If you look outside of that and you look at gene therapy and some of where other things like that could potentially go, I know people are working on it and they're struggling. It's not really worked very well, but there was a bright spot recently of a gene therapy that works for a very specific gene mutation that happens in some infants. That's showing promising results. But outside of that, on the device side, it's Envoy Medical is really going to be the change agent, and I'm pretty excited about it.
Right, great. So let's turn to your Envoy's products, and you have one in the market, as you mentioned, Esteem, and one in development, Acclaim. So I've got a three-part question here. What are the technological differences between them? Are they targeting different patient profiles? And how do they stack up against the device offerings of Australia's Cochlear and you mentioned Switzerland's Sonova?
So you have the two products are different in a couple of important ways, but I'm actually going to start with the similarities. So the similarities between the two devices, the Esteem and the Acclaim, are that they are both fully implanted and that they both use our very specialized sensor technology to pick up sound vibrations off of the ossicles. So you have your ear. We all know the big floppy thing on the side of our head. That's called your pinna. And then we all are pretty familiar with your ear canal and eardrum. But some of us don't know that behind that eardrum, there's these three tiny bones that take the vibration from the eardrum and transmit it to the cochlea. We actually pick up the signal off of those bones, and that's how we pick up the sound vibrations. And then we use that information to create a signal that we can deliver the therapy based on. So that is our similarities between our two devices. And if you want to think about Envoy Medical and why it's so special, it's because that sensor lets us use the ear to pick up sound, but it also allows us to have a fully implanted system. So now the Esteem is what we call, and the FDA calls, a fully implanted active middle ear implant. And it is the only available, fully implanted, active middle ear implant in the US. It's the only one to ever get FDA approval, and it's the only one currently available globally, as far as I'm concerned. There was another product, but that was taken off the market. So that product is for moderate to severe sensorineural hearing loss. So that's sort of in that middle range of hearing loss. And then we'll go to the Acclaim. The Acclaim is a investigational device. So it's currently in clinical trials. It's not commercially available. We're in clinical trials here in the US. And that is a fully implanted cochlear implant. So people are familiar with cochlear implants and that they have the big external things on the side of their head. It looks like almost like you're plugged into a computer, where our device, you won't have anything on the side of your head. You will just, it'll be fully implanted, and we're using the ear to pick up sound. That device is currently, it's in trial, so I don't know what the final indications are going to be, but the candidacy for that trial is severe to profound sensorineural hearing loss with speech recognition scores of 40% or below, aided speech recognition scores of 40% or below. So these are for people who are significantly hard of hearing and cannot benefit from a hearing aid. Those folks need a cochlear implant, and we believe we got the best cochlear implant for them. And just to give you a sense of kind of leading into your second part of that question about the other companies, there's about 25,000 to 30,000 devices sold in the United States every year. Globally, it's about 60,000. The average sales price for those products is in the 25,000 range. So it's about $1 billion market globally. But the number of people that could get a cochlear implant just in the United States is about 4 million. And so the penetration rate is incredibly low in this market. Our investment thesis is rather obvious. I personally believe that most people don't get cochlear implants because of those big external things on the side of their head. I think people find out that they need a cochlear implant and they don't pursue it because they have that big thing and they just don't want to even deal with it. So we believe not only do we have a device that will be able to be, and we're studying this, so I can't make any claims around it, but we believe we're working towards, proving that it's safe and efficacious. And if we are able to prove that, we would get FDA approval. So if we're able to come to market, I just believe that people are going to choose our device over the others. And frankly, we only need to sell a couple thousand years to be a wildly successful business. So if you have a $4 million market just in the 4 million people just in the United States, and we only need a couple thousand to be a successful business, I think you understand why I think we have a really nice opportunity ahead of us.
Right. But you've had, as you have had one product on the market, Esteem. That's been, it's well known that's been struggling to gain any traction. Part of it is due to the lack of reimbursement, but we have an introduction of new CPT codes for middle ear implants, which should make a material difference in general. But how do you see that?
Reimbursement is an incredibly complex situation for medical device companies to navigate. And unfortunately, the company, Envoy Medical's prior management teams did not do the legwork that they should have done in the early 2000s. And I know that sounds like I'm blaming people, and I guess in some way I am, but I would tell you that we tried to get commercialization as a cash pay device, so cash pay only. We did not take any steps for insurance reimbursement. That was a huge mistake. And, we all admitted that mistake. And after we realized cash pay was not a viable option. When I became CEO in 2015, one of the first things we made the pivot to the cochlear implant, but then in the background, we started working on insurance reimbursement for the Esteem. And we continue to do it to this day. So you alluded to the category 3 CPT codes. So CPT codes are part of the stool. If you're familiar with reimbursement, you need coding, coverage, and payment. You need all 3 legs of those stool for it to work. So now we have some coding. Now we need to work on coverage. Coverage is, we need the Blue Cross Blue Shields of the world and CMS to cover the device, have what's called a positive coverage policy. We don't have those yet. So we're working on that now. And then we'll get to the payment where we go through that process. Now for Envoy and for the Esteem, the actual larger challenge, the initial, even before we get to the stool, if you will, we need to go back and say, is this a coverable benefit? Like, why is it not a coverable benefit? And the reason is that CMS calls us a hearing aid, which it is not a hearing aid. Right. And we did not correct that for the first 15 years of the company when we should have. And so we've been working with CMS. I have meetings with them. I'm working with people in both the Congress and in the Senate the House and the Senate, so both houses of Congress, to have that changed. And I'm hopeful that with, the more I do this and the more momentum we can get that reversed so that this is covered just like cochlear implants are covered and just like bone conduction devices are covered. Right. And if that were to happen, Envoy Medical would suddenly become the only company in the world with a fully implanted active middle ear implant, the only one with FDA approval, and it would put us in a very significant opportunity. So I know I'm kind of rambling on here, but I would go back to your question and you saying part of it was insurance. I think almost 100% of the reason the Esteem did not take flight was because of insurance reimbursement. And I would wager a significant sum that if we are able to get some positive changes there, and we're getting, the momentum is moving, CPT codes, these things take time, but we're starting to knock some of these things over. Once we get to that point, I really like our opportunity to create an entire new market segment within the hearing industry.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, I mean, how much if I were to have an implant of Esteem, how much would that be an all-in cost to me?
If you were to want to pay for this today, we could introduce you to a couple of the sites that are doing it throughout the country, and on sort of where it depends on where you're located or if you're willing to fly. But on the lower end of things, it's going to cost you about $25,000. And that includes both the device and the surgery for the Esteem. Right. Now, it's cheaper than a cochlear implant. So it's another part of this answer for reimbursement. If you want to get a cochlear implant and you want to pay out of pocket, you're looking north of $40,000 or $50,000. Right. So the Esteem is a wonderful opportunity. We have about 1,000 patients implanted. They love the device, but it just wasn't covered by insurance. And that's a foot fault, or that's a false start for a company in our situation, right. and we're trying to rectify that now.
Yeah. Presumably, Acclaim has a better chance of succeeding those cochlear implants. You
can imagine. I was very sensitive to this topic, so one of the first things we did was talk to CMS, and we said, "You agree this is not a hearing aid, right? We're not going to go through this again." And they said, "No, you're obviously a cochlear implant. Your mode of operation is exactly what a cochlear implant is," and so we are moving in that direction, and I'm very confident we'll be able to use the existing CPT codes for cochlear implants, just as a new pacemaker coming into the market would be able to plug itself into the existing pacemaker codes. So we will be able to do that as well.
Great. So talking about Acclaim, can you at this point give us an idea of the map out the road to commercialization, approximate timeline you estimate to get to that point, and the funding you need to get Acclaim over the line?
So the timeline right now, so I'll just back up a little bit and kind of tell you where we are in the timeline. So first, in 2022, we started an early feasibility study. So that's a first in man study. We did it here in the United States. We did 3 patients at Mayo Clinic. We're a Minnesota company, as I alluded to earlier. Mayo Clinic's obviously in Minnesota. It's great to be able to work with such a world-class surgeon and institution. And so we implanted 3 patients, and we've been following those patients now. They're almost at their 3-year visit. They still have the device, still working well, and no major safety issues. So that's been going well. In that part of the study, we learned some things about the device that we were able to tweak or improve prior to starting our pivotal study. So we made some changes, very minor but important changes. We made those changes and started the pivotal study. We got the IDE approval for that November of last year, started implanting in this year. So now we have 10 patients implanted in the pivotal study. We agreed with the FDA that we would do this in 2 stages. So we will do 10 patients. We'll follow those patients for 3 to 6 months, tell the FDA how it's going, and hopefully then they allow us to expand into the second stage. I believe that expansion, and it's my sort of best guess at the moment, but it will come down to the FDA's review team and how they feel about things. But my best guess is that we will get that expansion by the end of the year or shortly thereafter, and then implant the remaining 46 patients. We'll have to follow the very last patient, is sort of how that timeline then figures out. So we'll follow that last patient for 13 months. And then from there, we submit to the FDA. Long story short, without getting too far into the details, we would then submit probably in the middle of 2027 to FDA for PMA approval. They get 180 days to review and make their decision. They can also ask us to do what's called a panel review, which will add about 120 days onto that. So I would anticipate commercialization happening in the first part of 2028. In terms of overall funding, we probably need $60 million to get there. And then, maybe we raise another 20 million. These are all, best guesses at this point. So somewhere between 60 and 80 million probably to get to cash flow break even is my guess.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. Right. Final question from me really is, you mentioned really the market, especially for cochlear, is really an oligopoly. Three companies, Australia's Cochlear, Switzerland's Sonova, and then you've got Austria's, is it Austria, from Austria, Medel?
Yes.
So they basically control the market. You have cochlear basically way ahead at 65% market share. So how do you break that sort of stranglehold? I mean, they probably have a lot of infrastructure already in place and connections and relationships. So what sort of strategy are you going to pursue, and what lessons might you take from your experience with Esteem's commercialization process?
Yeah, so I would say that I think we're in a very good position, in part because there is an oligopoly, and the oligopoly is rather complacent and sleepy at this point. Similar to how did Apple go from not having a phone to putting BlackBerry and Nokia basically in everybody's rearview mirror. I think there's an opportunity always for a new technology to disrupt the existing marketplace. I will also tell you, and I alluded to this in the very beginning, I went around and talked to patients and surgeons and audiologists when I was in the field. There is a hunger and there is a desire to have new competition and new innovation in the hearing implant space. Patients and professionals have a resentment towards the fact that manufacturers in this place keep sort of pumping out the same, more of the same. And there is a desire to have new technologies. Now, when we go to commercialization, I am not going to go everywhere. I am going to focus very similar to what Intuitive Surgical did with the Da Vinci robots. We'll pick certain locations throughout and we'll go deep with those sites. If you want to work with us, that's great, but we want to see you do a lot of these. I'm not interested in signing up somebody to be a site who's going to do 1 or 2 a year. I want to sign up a center that's going to do 100. And so we're going to focus on high volume sites that are really interested and committed to this technology. And we will go deep with those folks, get our foothold, and then go from there. And I think the other companies, they have too much to lose too. One of the other things you need to remember with the existing cochlear implant companies, they all have these external devices. They make a lot of money reselling those external devices. They're not in a rush to displace or cannibalize their own market share. Envoy Medical does not have that problem. We do not have legacy products with external. So we will be able to go immediately into this new market and take over that segment. And I think the other companies have some very significant business risks. And, maybe that means one of them comes after us and tries to take us out because we're too disruptive. But that should be a positive situation for our shareholders. Yeah. I just really believe we have a great opportunity. If you look at the market cap of Cochlear, for example, which is about $14 billion, and you look at ours today, which is somewhere in the 30s, to me, that's not a rational difference. That is not a logical difference between the two, especially with the opportunity that we have. So I'm hoping to close that gap, and I don't think it's going to take terribly long to do so once we get commercial.
Okay, that's really interesting. But anyway, thank you, Brent, for all that information and your insights into the hearing loss market and the products that are out there and your products and their advantages. So I'll pass it back to Tim.
Thanks, Robert. Brent, before we wrap up, I have I guess you could say, an extemporaneous question that I could probably even better frame as a loaded question. In driving new user demand, in your opinion, is it more important to educate ENTs and audiology doctors who then educate their patients on your products, or more important to create end user demand by advertising and awareness campaigns?
It's a great question. I would say that I would focus it just on the awareness campaign. So I think the consumer, the hearing loss user, is actually a rather motivated group, especially people that are in that significant hearing loss, that severe to profound category. So by putting information on the internet, and now you can be your own advocate, you can locate things, patients are finding it. I've actually talked to several audiologists recently and some surgeons, but a lot of audiologists who have reached out to me to say, hey, my patient just asked me about this new fully implanted cochlear implant that you guys are working on. Could you tell me about it? So the patients are driving the demand, and I think that will be the case, commercialization. And then the second focus would be audiologists. And we need audiologists to really start talking about this. So I would say we'll go to patients with awareness campaigns. I don't want to spend a lot of money on TV and other sort of expensive direct to consumer. So we will focus on sort of that grassroots campaign and advocacy efforts, plug into a couple of very motivated patient groups, and then go from there. That's sort of our idea right now. But we believe, especially in the first couple of years, the patients will drive the demand. And I will also tell you that we're already getting media attention. And once we get even closer to FDA approval or upon FDA approval, it's going to be pretty hard to ignore that we're coming. And I anticipate us getting a lot of attention, which is just going to drive our ability to capitalize on that.
That's really interesting interplay. Thanks for joining us today, Brent Lucas, CEO of Envoy Medical, NASDAQ ticker symbol COCH. And thanks to my equity research colleague, Robert Sassoon, for also joining us. Finally, a special thanks to the WTR producer and editor of the podcast, Joe Brunetto. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, as well as visiting www.watertowerresearch.com to stay up to speed on the company's small cap written research reports, podcast, fireside chats, and conference schedules. We'll see you next time for another edition of the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast.